Welcome everyone to this next presentation at the New York Encounter. Is it possible to work this way? This presentation is about exploring whether the purpose of work, the business of business, whether it's really exclusively about the maximization of profit. And that the maximization of profit, if that's really just about the pursuit of corporate and individual self-interest. Certainly our experience of life, right, as human beings is certainly much broader than this. We don't measure our life merely by our income or salary. Our experience of life extends to our relationships, our community, our friends. And so does the experience of work have to be partial, have to be something focused again on profit and again narrow self-interest? Or can it be something that embraces all of who we are as human beings? On the other hand, is the pursuit of this question naive? After all, it's difficult for a business to start and persist in this particular day and age. It's a very competitive and globalized world. Are these aspects of who we are things that we just have to push aside in the difficult challenges that businesses face? Is it possible to work this way? There's a study that comes out every year by Fortune magazine that ranks what are the 100 top companies to work for in the United States. What they do is they survey the employees. They also survey the managers, but most of the weight is what the employees say. They ask employees, do you trust the people you work for? Do you enjoy working with the different people at your firm? And do you take pride in what you do? They ask the managers, is the organization achieving its goals? Do employees give their personal best? And do people work together as a team in an environment of trust? In other words, most of these questions have nothing to do with profit. Okay? They're asking about their experience of work. So this is published every year for the last 16 years. So this study went back and actually checked to see how these companies performed. Now they were looking at their stock price as sort of a starting point. The stock market in the United States over the last 16 years is up about 6% per year. These companies, which were not selected by how profitable they would be, but by the working environment as gauged by employees, these stocks were up 12% per year. They performed twice as well as the overall stock market. In other words, at a minimum, it's not the case that if we begin to take our humanity more seriously, more completely, is a company less profitable. It's not necessarily a distraction. And in fact, it might be the case that if we were to take our humanity more fully at our business places, that in fact businesses might in fact be more sustainably profitable over time. Well, to help us look at this question of how we can engage with work with all of our humanity, we have two terrific speakers here today. The way that the format will run is that Professor Naughton to my left will speak first, and then Mr. Bernhard Scholz will speak second. I'm going to give you a brief background to Professor Naughton. Professor Michael Naughton is the holder of the Alan W. Moss Endowed Chair in Catholic Social Thought at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, where he is a full professor with a joint appointment in the Departments of Catholic Studies in the College of Arts and Sciences and Ethics and Law in the Opus College of Business. He is the director of the John A. Ryan Institute for Catholic Social Thought at the Center for Catholic Studies, which examines Catholic social thought in relationship to business theory and practice. As director, he has organized international conferences on the theme of Catholic social thought and management, as well as various faculty and administrative seminars on the mission and identity of Catholic universities. He is the co-author and co-editor of 9 books and over 30 articles. Please join me in welcoming Professor Naughton.
I go on the other side. I go to speak.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. This topic, is it possible to work this way? What I'd like to do is address this in a document that has come out from the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. It's a document called The Vocation of the Business Leader, which is up on your screens right now. It's in 16 languages at the current time. I do hope, whether you are a business person or a teacher or a doctor, or a truck driver, nurse, plumber, whatever you might be, that you still will find some value in this document, because this document is talking about the nature of work. And whether you are religious or not, I also hope the document can speak to your fundamental sense of humanity. The subtitle of this talk, Confronting the Logic of the Market with the Logic of the Gift, is kind of two different ways of looking at the question of work. And to help us get at this theme, that often underlying our understanding of work is a particular logic. And I've been hearing this theme throughout the whole conference, talking to people, particularly in the CL. It has to be connected to the stories of our lives. And for many of us sitting in this room, actually all of us sitting in this room, we all have an understanding of work, but sometimes we're not always conscious about what it is. And it's important that the ideas that I will talk about today are connected to the ideas of your stories. What are the stories of your life? I remember when I grew up on the south side of Chicago to Irish immigrant parents, and I was 16 and I was walking out the door one day, and my father looked at me and he says, Michael, you be a good boy, Michael. I said, sure, Dad, whatever. And before I could take another step, my father looked at me and says, Michael, if you can't be good, you be careful. I said, all right, I think I could do that. Well, an unfortunate event happened to me that night, and my father had to pick me up from a Chicago police station. I'll spare you the details about why he had to do that, but he walked into the police station, he looked at me and he said, Michael, I think you better just be good. Now, we live in a culture that is constantly talking about the idea of being careful. We have designated drivers, safe and careful drivers, who take home drunk and stupid friends. We have this thing called safe sex, somehow thinking that non-productive, disease-free sex will make up for its procreative and unitive meaning. We have a school system that's constantly concerned about test scores and grades, and yet our students have lost the love of learning. And yet we find ourselves in our own career strategies trying to figure out how we can get to the next step, and yet have lost a sense of what good work is. All of this talk on being careful loses sight and distracts us from this fundamental sense about what does it mean to be good at our work. And this is exactly what this document is about, the vocation of the business leader. It's about being good, as well as about being careful and being intelligent. But it's about being good, not in some superficial or extrinsic sense, not in terms of a kind of series of slogans that can sometimes be found, particularly in business, in terms of having integrity, in terms of having corporate social responsibility, in terms of having business ethics, right? All of those things can sometimes find themselves into kind of slogans. We had a presentation this morning, a wonderful presentation on Václav Havel. And Havel, in a sense, had similar concerns, particularly on the nature of human rights. And Havel said this. He said, politicians may reiterate 1,000 times that the basis of the New World Order must be universal respect for human rights. But it will mean nothing as long as this imperative does not derive from the respect for the miracle of the universe, the miracle of nature, the miracle of our own existence. Havel was concerned that human rights was becoming a slogan, that in a sense it was becoming something like cut flowers. It looked pretty, everyone seemed to enjoy it, but by its very nature it was atrophying, it was decaying, because fundamentally it lost a deep sense of a root system. If our ethic fails to be grounded in something that's more than simply law, something that more than simply is a platitude, something that's more than a kind of generic value commitment, our ethic will grow cold. And in a while, it will, in a sense, lose its ability to do what it's supposed to do. And so, what we need is a deep root system. We need a deep logic. And this document along with what the social tradition, particularly the Catholic social tradition, speaks about, is a logic of gift. And it's exactly what is at the heart of this document, a logic of gift. The document starts off with a quote from Jesus in the Gospels, where Jesus says, "From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much will be asked." The logic here is a logic that we have received, that we have been gifted, and in that receivement that we are to give. That's the nature of one's vocation, receiving and giving. I'll come back to this point a little bit later in the talk. This logic of the gift, however, is very different than simply the logic of the market only, and I emphasize only. But the logic of the market, whereas the logic of the gift presupposes that something is giving, the logic of the market presupposes that nothing is given and it's only acquired. You have to assail nature and grab things out of it, and then it becomes yours. Whereas the logic of the gift presupposes that we are chosen, the logic of the market sees only discrete individual choices, that one is no better than the other, and that we are simply the arbitrator of our own choices. To get at this question of the choice and chosenness, there's a wonderful book by a Jewish sociologist, Philip Reif, called The Triumph of the Therapeutic. And this is what Reif said. He said, "There is no more feeling more desperate than that of being free to choose, and yet without the specific compulsion of being chosen." The logic of the market often says that choice is the highest value, not the content of the choice. And yet we know that choice by itself does not have the capacity to give meaning to our work. Reif goes on to say, "After all, one does not really choose. One is chosen." This is one way of stating the difference between gods and men. Gods choose, men are chosen. At the deepest sense of the human spirit is this deep sense that we are called, but life often distracts us from the call, and we too often forget about what the call is. And finally, Reif says, what men lose when they become as free as gods is precisely that sense of being chosen, which encourages them in their gratitude to take their subsequent choices seriously. We cannot separate being free to choose and being chosen. And when we break this, we often take our choices less seriously. A wonderful literary writer, D.H. Lawrence, put it this way: "Men are not free when they are doing just what they like. The moment you can do just what you like, there is nothing you care about doing. Men are free when they are obeying some deep inward voice of religious belief." Too often our choices can create a small world. St. Augustine in the Confessions says, "The house of my soul is too small for you to come to it. May it be enlarged by you." Can we work this way? Can we work with this idea of this deep sense of being chosen? This document says yes, and it provides some specific forms. And so let me go to that idea of a specific form. The document is structured in a see, judge, act method, and it says this: "An important part of one's vocation entails seeing clearly the situation, judging with principles that foster the integral development of people, and acting in a way which implements these principles in light of one's circumstances." If we are to work as a vocation, we have to have a structure of how we see and judge and act reality. This is what Thomas Aquinas called practical wisdom, how to be wise in practical affairs. And so the document tries to describe what this practical wisdom look at. So let's look at each one: seeing, judging, and acting. Seeing. What does the leader see, or what do you see when you go to work? Key to this is, what have you sensitized yourself to what you see? And this seeing is about seeing things whole and not just seeing parts. Seeing the whole of reality and not merely a part of reality. There's a very famous philosopher in this country by the name of Alistair McIntyre. And he has argued that universities are increasingly losing their capacity to help their students see things whole. To see, in a sense, how things are in relationship with each other because they become so specialized that they've lost sight of the whole. And McIntyre says that our current economic recession, Iraq war, the Middle East, the growing inequality, the Iranian Revolution back in the 70s, were all products of misjudgments of highly intellectual, elite, highly educated people. The problem with them was not that they didn't have more specialized training. The problem, according to McIntyre, is they lost the habit of mind to see things whole. Seeing is also about seeing fact and value and not just numbers. Any of you who are in organizations will also know the slogan, if it cannot be measured, it does not exist. But this spirit is exactly what prevents us from seeing reality. It distorts the vision that we often bring to what we do at work. And the seeing is also about seeing beyond neighbors to fraternity. To see people as not just simply entities, but as brothers and sisters. I have a friend of mine who runs a construction company in Mexico City, and he once said to me, he says, you know, when I encounter a lot of American CEOs, they often speak about their employees as employees, but they often don't see that these are family members. They're mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. So how do we see is of critical importance. More specifically for business people, and I suspect for any of you where you find yourself at work, we often see in our workplaces permanent whitewater. Things are changing fast, and it's hard to get a grasp about what's being seen. In the document, it speaks about 4 things about what business people see: globalization, communication technology, financialization of the economy, and cultural changes. All of these bring a great deal of complexity to the business world, all of which makes it difficult sometimes to know how to act. But all of them, in many respects, begs the question, on what principles do you make judgments? And so we come to the second aspect of the structure of this document, judging with principles. Because in order to see well, we have to be able to judge well. The two are intrinsically bounded together. And so this judging is about being formed in first principles that can guide decisions that foster the integral development of people. In the document, the quote below says this: the ability to make reasoned judgments must be nurtured in the moral and spiritual culture from which business leaders come, namely their families, religion, educational institutions, and the larger communities to which they belong. Business nor government can produce its own moral capital. What produces the moral capital is out of the culture in which people come from. So key to judgment is the family, is the church, is education. But these principles do something else. They remind us and they reveal for us the purpose of the trip. Because one of the biggest problems for all of us sitting in this room is amnesia. We forget often the good. We sometimes forget the purpose of the trip. But these principles are also, in a sense, to help us locate what is the good that business should do. Every institution should articulate a set of goods that define what they do. And in this document, it defines 3 goods of business: good goods, good work, good wealth. Business is about good goods. It's about making goods which are truly good and services which truly serve. Many of us often don't think we have a vocation because we don't think what we do is very big. But we have to realize that in business or whatever discipline you are in, this is how we get access to the goods of the world. It's how we get food and shelter and transportation and clothing and energy. This is a very good thing. It's not simply, it is ordinary in the best sense of the word that we often use ordinary time in the liturgy. And so what we do in an ordinary way can also be a very good thing. The problem, however, is that the logic of the market often reduces this ordinariness to simply either legality or price. And that is often the thing that they describe as what is good. The second good is good work. Business is about organizing work where employees develop their gifts and talents, the growth of people in your organizations, to help them exercise their talents and their abilities in what they do. In 1931, Pius XI wrote an encyclical called Quadrage Humano, and he says this. He says, why is it that matter goes into factories and come out noble products, yet workers go into factories and come out degraded, right? We have to be concerned about good work in all institutions that we have. And thirdly, good wealth, creating sustainable wealth and distributing it justly. You cannot distribute what you have not created, but you cannot create wealth without addressing how you distribute it. These three goods help us to resist the temptation that was spoke about at the beginning of this session of reducing business to a unidimensional reality, to simply profit, the so-called bottom line of business. But here's the interesting thing. This temptation is common in all institutions. We're seeing it today in marriage, reducing marriage to simply one good, the sentiment of the couple. Reducing education to simply a credentialing of the career. Our institutions need a robust sense of goods. And all of us who find ourselves in those institutions, our vocation is to, in a sense, build up those goods to make them good institutions. So what ought we do? The third part, acting. The document, however, interesting enough, the Vocation of the Business Leader document does not start off with a whole set of list of things to do, but it starts off with this first act. The first act within the logic of gift is to receive what God has done for us. To receive the scriptures, to honor the Sabbath, to pray, to participate in the deep silence of human life. That provides the receptivity to provide a deep well of reflection about how we can see the reality of the world. The Sabbath, for example, is not an escape from work, but rather it detaches us from work to help us to see work more clearly. The key thing is this idea of receptivity. The second act that the document talks about is the document or the act of giving. The second act is to give in a way which responds to what we have been received. Mr. Schulz will be up here pretty soon speaking about much of what one should be doing, about good work, about good goods, and about good wealth, and I'll leave that to him. These two actions are of critical importance in a rhythm. Later today, you'll be hearing from, I think, one of the best and most creative theologians in America, David Schindler. And Schindler, I think, provides a wonderful synthesis of these two actions. And this is what Schindler says. He says, when we first experience our being as created, as being gifted life, this receiving enables us to see our doing and having as ways of giving which they were meant to be. It's a powerful statement. I think what David Schindler is talking about, and this is exactly what the vocation of the business leader is talking about, that we have to be able to make sure that if we don't get receptivity right, we'll never get giving right. If we don't get rest right, or leisure right, or prayer right, we'll never get work right. If we don't get the Sabbath right, we'll never get Monday right. Benedict XVI has a wonderful line where he says, the person comes to the profoundest sense of himself not through what he does, but through what he accepts. Not through what he achieves, but what he receives. This is probably the most hardest thing for a business person to get. That the key thing to their lives is not what they achieve. The key thing is to recognize what they have received. So is it possible to work this way? Actually, this is the only way to work, because it is built within our DNA to receive and give, the rhythm of receptivity and of giving. So let me conclude with a final quote, which I think sums up all of this at the heart of what this document is about. And it comes from John Henry Newman. And Newman says this: God created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me which he has not committed to another. I have my mission. I never may know it fully in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. Somehow I am necessary to his purposes. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Our next speaker to my right, to your left, is Bernhard Scholz. Bernhard Scholz was born in Mulheim, Germany. He's a management consultant who graduated in political science with a thesis on the process of rationalization in Max Weber. He then worked as a professional journalist and managed the press office of the Archdiocese of Freiburg in Breisgau. At the same time, he worked on improving his knowledge of public relations, internal communications, and organizational culture. At the end of the 90s, he devoted himself specifically to consultancy and managerial training, working for a consultancy company for multinationals with its headquarters in Milan. Since 2003, he's been manager of the Scuola di Impresa della Fondazione per la Sussidiarietà. That's a lot of Italian for me. A business school aimed specifically at small businesses. In 2008, he was elected president of Compagnia delle Opere, which means companionship of works, or what we'll refer to as the CDO. Bernhard Scholz is married and has 3 children. Let me just say a few words about the CDO, which is the organization that Bernhard Scholz leads. For the last 25 years, the CDO has worked with businessmen seeking a new, more constructive way to economic, social, and cultural challenges. This operational friendship, driven by the sense of responsibility and by the desire to contribute to the common good that is present in all of us, has spawned a wide variety of profit and nonprofit initiatives over the years. The CDO today consists of 34,000 businesses and 1,000 nonprofit organizations. The CDO promotes a networking culture among companies and provides services to facilitate the internationalization of businesses, the ability to join forces in order to consolidate existing business and win new export markets is going to be decisive for the future of all companies. The CDO offers financial and commercial services as well as training and innovation development for its members. Again, the focus here is on the concrete support for everyday business challenges. Through a range of initiatives in which new protagonists are always welcome, the CDO is confirming its commitment to helping individuals and associations promote genuine human progress in all historical, cultural, and economic circumstances. Please join me in welcoming Bernhard Scholz.
Thank you very much for this invitation, which was for me an opportunity to reflect more deeply upon the origins and the perspectives related to our work and our businesses. The association CDO was born in 1986 by a provocation of Father Giussani, who asked some of the friends of communion and liberation why their friendship didn't involve the real needs of people. And furthermore, he invited them to help everything exist. So, since its beginning, CDO was engaged with the meaning of work and entrepreneurship, both in the profit and the non-profit worlds. In the last few years, questions have grown and intensified, also because of the financial and economic crisis. As a matter of fact, this crisis is not just a cyclical problem. It is the end of an epoch that we can outline with a certain clarity and the beginning of a new one that is still to be constructed. I will try to summarize this transformation considering three aspects. The first aspect. With the entry of new countries into the international market, namely the so-called globalization, and with the end of the economic prevalence of North America and Europe, there have been direct or indirect consequences for all companies and all professionals around the world. So we need new business strategies and new political rules allowing a fair exchange of goods and services without privileges and without monopolies. Second aspect, in the relationship between finance and economy, we can see that finance being an end in itself and finance as exploitation of the real economy is not longer sustainable. Finance is necessary to the economy, but it's not an aim in itself. Economy must be a service to the common good, and finance should serve economy. The third aspect regards the role of the state in the economy. Too often, especially in Europe, the governments were called to save everything, but this has often reduced the sense of responsibility and solidarity and boosted the public debt that will penalize future generations. The state must make rules to create the conditions for a correct economy and take action to help those in need who can't find a real support. But first of all, it is his task to open spaces and sustain, in the logic of subsidiarity, all the educational, social, cultural, and economical initiatives of civil society. Most people understand these new challenges, knowing well that there are no automatic answers and that there are no new models just to be applied. We are in a period of deep transformation whose aim is to create a new future in the direction of a more human society with a sustainable economy. At this point, a fundamental question arises for each of us. Are we just spectators or even passive victims of this transformation? Or can we intervene actively and contribute positively to this evolution? My answer is yes. We can do it starting from our working and entrepreneurial experience, capturing its educational and cultural values. If we look carefully in the three macro factors that I have listed, we can see that they all have their roots in a series of anthropological problems. What is the meaning of work? What is the meaning of being a company, and what is the meaning of economy? What is the responsibility of each individual, and how the states can realize their responsibility? If we do not find true and meaningful answers to these questions, it is unlikely that this transformation will be successful. I would like to comment on this regard on some experiences related to the nature and the dynamics of our work. We have in our association some professional training schools that are dedicated to boys and girls coming from disadvantaged social and family situations. The training alternates between working experience and school, getting the young people to know, on one hand, how to become cooks, hairdressers, mechanics, carpenters, accountants, and on the other hand, they are learning literature, mathematics, history, and often a foreign language. The amazing thing is the results. After attending these schools, boys and girls at the age of about 18 are really competent, talented, interested, highly motivated. The work experience and the professional knowledge are for them an opportunity to express their talents and interests. They gain an in-depth knowledge of a particular activity and live a positive relationship with others. All of this was not taken for granted by them. It is a true and dynamic discovery. They became proud of their work, and in addition, they are learning something else not to be taken for granted, the sense of responsibility. Many of these girls and guys do internships in different companies. And the entrepreneurs who allow them to work in their firms do not receive any kind of economic return, but they do it with a true enthusiasm, demonstrated above all by the great passions, for example, in picking them up from home in the morning when they do not want to get up. And the entrepreneurs themselves are often surprised to understand that for these young people, work is the first big chance to have an experience of self-discovery. And this experience can also be useful for those who accompany them in life and work. The Italian chief executive officer of an Italian chain of hotels relates how this experience of working with our professional schools has impacted him. We have pushed, so he said, we have pushed hard to have young people do internships with us in order to give them the opportunity to understand what real life is. But the most important aspect was to be able to put together these young people who had difficult life experiences together with people who probably followed easier journeys. So all this becomes a form of help for all of us, giving us the chance to re-evaluate our own priorities of life. Another entrepreneur who has taken on one of these guys said, "Honestly, it is not a risk, but it's my desire and my privilege to explain to young people that the job to be done and to relate it to the working environment." If we really want a more human society and economy, we cannot fail to share the meaning of work that is reflected in these statements and in the experiences of these young people. I would like to highlight some aspects that have emerged with greater clarity. The first aspect is the most immediate. A job allows one to live, to create a family, to get to know the world. The second aspect concerns self-knowledge. When I'm in action, I can get to know myself, my talents, my virtues. I understand that a job can make me grow not only professionally, but also as a human being. The third aspect concerns relationships. Normally, the job is a chance to develop relations with other people, and these relations are as difficult as they are desired. This is due to the fact that it's impossible to live and to become ourselves without relationships. But relationships are every time very challenging because they help me to discover, often through a lot of difficulties, to explore the true value of myself and of the others. Our work is first and foremost an expression of our life, of our desire to live in a better way and to live with others, of our desire to express ourselves and our talents, and not least of our desire to be useful to the world around. There is a big difference between suffering work only as something you have to do and facing it as a privileged opportunity to become yourself and to grow even in difficult conditions. Those who come from difficult life conditions, paradoxically, often understand life better than others. This kind of person doesn't take anything for granted, and searching for a full meaning makes it a more profound and lasting experience. So much that the young people of our training schools are often hired before other young people because they have a higher and stronger motivation. Facing the work in the limited way of an individualistic concept only reduced to gain more money, to get more power, brings no kind of satisfaction. And this is the reason why the fixation on money and career becomes more and more fierce and violent. People who became accustomed with this mindset became sooner or later depressed and live with a resentment that isolates them more and more. So how it is possible to calm these and other reductions of the sense of work? Let's go back to the girls and guys of our vocational schools. How did they get out of their difficulties? They did it because they meet someone who believed in them, someone who showed a free interest in them, someone who communicated to them that their lives have an infinite value. So these young people began to understand that within themselves they had an infinite desire waiting to be released and became a force able to let them experience true life, bringing a change in their very selves and in the relationship with the world around them. If we are not aware of who we are, we will try to increase the value of our life through what we do, namely by means of the appearances that we will create around ourselves. Without a truly free encounter which opens us to the experience of ourselves, our work tends to be a continuous assertion of ourselves. On the other hand, if a person has the experience of being fully accepted in an unconditional way, then his work becomes what it really is, a service able to give a large contribution to the realization of the self and to the realization of the world. In this way, our work becomes a way to educate ourselves. And this is true not only for young people, but also for every one of us. In education, it is an education to a creative and responsible form of freedom. The second experience I want to share relates to the meaning of enterprise, the sense of company. For almost 10 years now, our association has been organizing something we call matching. This is an international meeting between businesses of all sectors of businesses and services, whereby entrepreneurs and managers meet and share information, knowledge, and experience. The novelty of matching, which is participated by more than 2,000 small and medium-sized enterprises, attracted the interest of a researcher from a British university who organized a 3-year case study. One of the results of this research was to show that those who benefited most from matching were those who conceived it as a kind of training for themselves, carried out through dialogue with others. This dialogue drew out personal potential and possibilities for change that in the daily internal communication activity of a company would have never emerged with such clarity. When people speak about the aim of an enterprise, normally they put profit in the center. But the dialogues that take place during the matching bring out clearly that the purpose of business is not profit, but the creation of customers, to use a successful expression of Peter Drucker. Of course, profit is an absolute necessity in developing any company, but it is not its aim. All the positive tension of these business owners and managers who talk to each other with sincerity and interest is based on the fact that they conceive their businesses as a collaboration between individuals who have to succeed in a consistent and long-lasting way in the market by obtaining the satisfaction of current and future clients. Profit is a necessary consequence of this approach, and only this approach opens to a long-term perspective with a higher probability to create employment. So during the matching, we can see the evolution of an idea of competition as something really useful for everyone. In the common business mentality, the concept of competitiveness tends to be fierce and warlike. But the market can be seen as a war of mors tua vita mia, death for you, life for me, as often happens, or instead, it can be faced as a useful and provocative comparison which invites all players to develop the best of what they are able to do. The sense of the market is not the elimination of someone, but the comparison, the provocation to the best of everyone together with the value of choice as we listened before. So when a company really follows its original nature and allows people to work well, it becomes useful for everyone. For those who work there, for those who benefit from its products and services, and also for the civil society, which grows with the creation of jobs and the empowerment of people. Let me conclude with a final thought. It seems to me that it has become evident how the real change needed to transform our society and our economies is in the self-consciousness we have and in the experience of work we live. As it turns out, it is not a set of morals or ethics, but the discovery of the nature of our person and of our work, the discovery of the nature of a company and of economy. Either our work is considered an expression of an open, creative and supportive personal identity, or it becomes self-assertion with an impossible and then violent claim to create one's own identity through success. Either our companies are working places serving our customers and their users, or they are places where we have a short-term gain and consequently a long-term distortion of business and economy. It's not a moral question, but a matter of fact that it's not possible to achieve in a long term a good for myself or my company if I don't consider the good of the others who stays in relationship with me. So you can understand that the Christian experience is a very decisive factor in real transformation of the economy that starts from new players able to discover or rediscover with the intelligence of faith the original dynamics of work. In this regard, the Church's social doctrine is extremely useful as a fundamental orientation, but the map doesn't substitute for the journey, and good advice cannot take away the risks of the adventure. The time taken for the journey of transformation is not in our hands. Each of us has the task of starting by taking the first steps. And because whether these steps are going in the right direction depends on each of us, it makes a lot of sense to go together in a great company, sustaining everyone in his own personal responsibility. And so Christian experience can become the leaven for a new development in which the good of the person, the good of our work, and the good of society become meaningfully and creatively related. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scholz. Maybe just one quick question for each speaker here. Professor, in the document you referenced and in your talk as well, there's this attention towards this problem that that people in the business will often lead very divided lives. In our society, we have a distinction between for-profit and non-profit companies, and that distinction also is a distinction that I think people struggle with. I mean, in my firm, I know we struggle with it, that you're trying to maximize profits. What do these other aspects of who we are have to do with the business of business? So how do you think about this dualism, and what helps us surmount that?
It's a great question, and it's a fundamental human problem. I think what you're really getting at is this question of the divided life. There's a document from Vatican II called Gaudium et Spes, Church in the Modern World. In paragraph 43, it says this. It says, one of the most dangerous errors of our age is the split between professional and work life and religion. And what's interesting is they're highlighting the kind of fundamental problem that all of us are divided. In fact, when people say they have integrity, you watch your wallet. You know, there's a sense that none of us have integrity, because all of us are struggling with this fundamental sense that we are burdened by a sense of division. It's what we call the fall. It's what we call original sin. In fact, the very word to divide comes from the same Greek word we get diabolic. There's something about the human condition that we are divided. And so we have to recognize that dilemma. Integrity is not an easy project. It's a lifelong project, because we're trying to overcome something that's fundamental in our condition. But it's interesting, the document says that it's one of the greatest errors of our age, that there's something about our age that we perpetuate this problem of division. And thus we divide faith and work, faith and reason, the spirit and the secular, the sacred and the secular, things of that sort. We have divided these kind of areas that we think we can compartmentalize our life. McIntyre talks about this fundamental problem of compartmentalization. And that is a kind of fundamental dilemma that we have to face in the modern world. And sometimes we don't see it. We operate in default mode. We think this is normal. But part of the culture is, in the sense, we have to be careful of, in a sense, disconnecting us from that culture that sees it as normal. So that is why movements like at CL or the Focolari or any of and it's why the church is so important, why the family is so important. We have to step back from this. It's very interesting. The word integrity has two interesting meanings. The first one I think most of you are familiar with. It comes from the Latin integritas, to make whole. It's where we get the word integer, a whole number. How do we become whole? But there's another word for integrity. It comes from another interesting word that actually talks about being unblemished and untouched by the world. And thus, we have to be careful that our work does not corrupt us. That is why it is so important that we need to step back from our work, to have a vision that has integrity. You know, I was going to mention this at the beginning, and then I'll stop. My first exposure to CL was about 20 years ago at the University of Cambridge. I was there giving a talk, and the speaker before me was a woman named Simona Beretta. And Simona is a member of the CL, and she's been a member for many years. And when I heard Simona, I heard a woman who had the vision. I heard a woman who had an integral vision. And that's why movements such CLs, this is why the church and its social teachings can provide us that ability to see things whole. Because often the categories that we're operating with in our work and in our culture and even in our universities actually just see the parts.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Scholz, the matching program you mentioned, I think is really compelling. This idea that what first starts a business, right, isn't a desire to compete. It's a desire to create something, from the logic of gift that the professor was talking about. So the competition isn't all that is needed for businesses to succeed. There are other things, there are other ways in which we relate and engage in the world, and the collaboration of this matching program. So what do you think is the resistance culturally to using a broader use of our reason when it comes to business?
I think the problem is that we don't understand our experience. because when as I said, I am not what I do. I'm not defined by what I do. I'm not defined by my failures, by my success. But what I do gives me the possibility to know better myself. You know, it's an expression of mine, and so I can understand better who I am, you know, in the relation with the others, the kind of work I do. And so I will give a short example. There is a great difference between satisfaction, which is very important to growth, and the pleasure. And this is the test if you are very true in your life, if you are very related to your real desire, because the desire brings us often to make great sacrifices. And often there's a great betraying of this desire to get some short pleasure in work too. You know, more power, more success in the moment. And so we are, the great temptation is to go to short perspectives and not to long-term perspectives. You know. And so in this way, we can understand the resistance to a new and really true conception of competitiveness. Because if my aim is to eliminate someone other, if my aim is to have a short-term success, normally I'm not involved in the really development of my company. The first aim of competitiveness is to develop in a very, as the Professor Naughton said in a very good way, is to develop my company, to give the best, that everyone which works with me can express his talents, his interests. And this is the really good of a company. Not the question that to fight against others, no? But instinctively, it could be easier to have the aim to eliminate others, to fight against others. It could bring for someone perhaps more pleasure in the moment, and it seems to be easier. But it brings no satisfaction. I turn to this point. When you go to bed in the evening, you can't be real satisfied by such an approach. And so the criteria is within us ourselves. I'm satisfied or I have just some pleasure. I have give a contribution to a real growth of my company and of the society, or I have made some short-term agreement, some short-term decision without being real faithful to my own desire. This is the question. And so the criteria is within ourselves. I don't need other criteria. The question is, when I go to bed in the evening, I'm satisfied, I'm not satisfied. That's the only question. Normally, when I'm really satisfied, it's the consequence of a lot of sacrifices I do in the day. I did in the day, okay? But I saw that there is a correspondence between my decisions, between what I am, between my way of work and the reality I have in front of me. Because I give a contribution to the reality and to myself. And this is the really satisfaction I can receive from a good way of work.
Thank you. So we've reached the end of this session, so we need to tie this up. But this question, is it possible to work this way? I think what we heard this afternoon from both the professor and Mr. Scholz here is very compelling from the level of insights, the experiences that we heard. The document that Professor Naughton referenced, The Vocation as a Business Leader, I've read it and it is fantastic. I would strongly recommend folks here to look at it and to really work on it for their own experiences. It's very readable, it's very practical, and it begins with this beautiful way of really conceiving of ourselves, this logic of gift over the logic of the market. Mr. Scholz, I think he highlighted three particular economic challenges earlier in his talk. He talked about globalization of businesses. He talked about the misuse of finance and its relationship with the economy, and the changing role of the state or the government. But then he asked a really, I thought, provocative question. I thought it was provocative. He said, namely, whether each one of us here can intervene and respond to these challenges. And his answer was an emphatic yes. And I think that's really worth taking away from here, that this is not primarily a problem of power. It's not that we're waiting for our politicians, our bosses, or CEOs to look at work differently. But this is a problem of culture. And in that sense, all of us here can take up this challenge, this problem, in terms of how we conceive of the meaning of work, how we engage with our colleagues, regardless of whether we're in a position of power or not. That is the path through which the human high becomes unified once again in our society. I really enjoyed preparing for this event. This was really fantastic and very helpful for me. On behalf of the New York Encounter and all of you, everyone involved in this effort, I really want to thank the both of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come here and spend the time with us. Thank you very much. Thank you.